It's 5 o'clock in London, it's midday in New York, 1 a.m. in Hong Kong, 4 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 11:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Patrick L. Young. The IPO-VID live stream, Series 22, Episode 5, that is in the aggregate. Episode 131 starts here. So Reddit have chosen the New York Stock Exchange, it seems, for their listing, which has been delayed since 2021. It appears that the IPO will be happening sometime soon, presumably with a lot of keyboard warrior input on the development of the company. Elsewhere, not so exciting to the keyboard warriors. I suppose in Switzerland, keyboard warriors in finance always talk about UBS and Credit Suisse. However, the Swissborg CEO, Jos Gisselhoff, has stamped on rumors concerning his corporate longevity while saying, watch this space for a big 6 Swiss exchange deal within 3 years. All funds have already been rumored as a target, where Euronext were, of course, pondering a deal sometime last year. In BitCarnage, while Ethereum's founder, Vitalik Buterin, doesn't want to be the focus of crypto, deeming himself too old. That leaves us to wonder, what does that infer about his code? Is Ether too old to front crypto version 2.0 as well? And let me say a huge word of thanks to the Association of Futures Markets, AFM, the Emerging Markets Exchange Association, and particularly the Thailand Futures Exchange, TFEX, part of the SET Stock Exchange of Thailand Group. They hosted a magnificent AFM conference last week where I was honored to give a keynote address in Bangkok, Thailand. And it was a joy to be there, even if it was a 24-hour trip there and a 24-hour trip back. All the best, incidentally, to the retiring AFM president, Paul Constantino, and congratulations to his replacement, Chris Sturgis. And of course, if you've been watching this show for a long time, ladies and gentlemen, you'll realize one former IPO-VID guest has replaced another. Our guest today is Brad Schaeffer. We're going to be discussing from the floor to the future with Brad Schaeffer. Brad is a polyglot commodities trader, musician, author, and widely read columnist on a range of topics everywhere from, periodicals such as The Hill all the way to the Wall Street Journal. Brad has just published his third book, which we'll be talking about a little later on, Life in the Pits, My Time as a Trader on the Rough-And-Tumble exchange floors, recounting Brad's time as a clerk, then a trader in the mosh pit of the commodities trading floors in Chicago and New York. Brad, welcome to IPO-VID. Where in the world are you today?
I'm actually in New Jersey at the moment, about 25 miles outside of Manhattan.
Excellent. So tell us, how did this journey start that got you to the pits of the floors of both CME and NYMEX?
One of the reasons that I wrote the book actually was to explain how it was sort of a circuitous route for most of us who got there, and which also was one of the many unique features of open outcry or floor trading, was the way you actually got down there. In my particular case, I had grown up in the Chicago area. I went to University of Illinois, and I graduated, in 1989 with a speech comm degree. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that. And fortunately, my actual first job was an artist in an ad agency, a little boutique agency in downtown Chicago. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. And then one day, my brother, who was a trader on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, he was a Eurodollar options trader. He actually sort of approached me and asked me if I would like to at least consider where he works, because he knew I wasn't making much money as an artist or anything like that. I was still living at home with our mother. And so I said, sure. So I went one lunch break, I think it was. We went down to the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is the exchange that you see in the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off when they go there. And I pushed through those heavy glass tinted doors. And when I did, the cacophony of the noise, it hit me like a blast from a bus exhaust in my face. There was screaming, there was yelling, there was the colors of all the different trading smocks people were wearing, the numbers flashing. It felt like walking kind of into like a World Cup stadium, and but more like a hangar. Actually, more like reminded me of the hangars in Oktoberfest in Germany. And anyway, I right away I was like, it was the most unique place I've ever seen. And so yeah, I wanted in. And so my brother had expected me to do that. He'd arranged an interview with his boss, and I got a job as a clerk. I donned a yellow jacket, and I went down on the floor, and I basically spent the next 30 years in the commodities business. So, and a lot of us kind of got down there through that unconventional way, and that was one of the things about floor trading that I liked, was that I felt it was a great equalizer in that guys who didn't have the MIT bona fides, guys who maybe weren't top of their class and went to, Harvard, or wherever, or Princeton, although there were some Harvard and Princeton guys down there, believe me. But I felt like guys like me who were state schoolers had a way to get into the finance business through the back door, so to speak. And now, unfortunately, it seems like that back door is closed now that the floors are gone, and it's a shame.
It's really interesting. Because I mean, you mentioned that, and actually, there've been a lot of articles recently in the UK press talking about the lack of equality for many different groups in the UK in terms of getting into wholesale finance in the City of London. And the argument I would always make was that the thing that actually killed that was the graduate trainee program in all the banks, because before that you had the floors and all of these sorts of places. Whereas you say, like, as Paul Gallico referred to it when he was still writing baseball commentary, even though he's a successful novelist, the reason he was there in the bleachers on a Saturday evening getting ketchup from other people's hot dogs sprayed all over his notes was because all human life was there. And it's so interesting, because I think actually there has been a downturn in diversity to a certain degree since the floors closed. And you're right, I remember from the live floor, we had, Robert Barnes, who was a guest on this show previously, he walked straight out of having done a Harvard PhD and arrived in UBS's team on the floor. And at the same time, you had 16-year-old school leavers on the live floor and people from every walk of life. It's incredible.
Well, I always like to use as my standard illustration is, I had two guys standing next to me. One of them was a high school dropout tennis pro who looked and dressed like Stephen Stills, even right down to the lamb chops, and the long hair. And the other guy was a Harvard law graduate who was, bespectacled, every hair in place. And you talk about two completely different, two different worlds that these guys came in. And I'm standing next to both of them, and they were each excellent traders, because they each had that X factor that transcends pedigree, that transcends your resume, that transcends your golf game, or your ability to schmooze the boss. And that was one of the things I liked about it, was once you got down there. I mean, like for instance, in my example, I always say the three favorite isms of Wall Street are capitalism, cronyism, and nepotism, right? And I was clearly the beneficiary of nepotism. But it got me through the door. But had I been unable to do the job, I would have washed out very quickly. And in trading, being unable to do the job very simply means, if we give you this amount of money, can you give us a return enough on this money to make it worth our while to give to you? It doesn't, if you say, well, listen, I didn't make very much money, but I did go to Yale. I'm like, okay, so what? That's great. What did your account do? And I think when you talk about the lack of diversity, we're really talking about diversity of thought as much as anything. Because if you have all these people coming out of these Ivy League-ish schools, and mind you, I'm a big fan of the Ivies. Some of the greatest technological innovations have come from these places. So I don't look at the LAS world as I do the STEM world when it comes to Ivy. They're two totally different worlds to me.
Yeah.
But even if you come out of the STEM world in Ivy, you come out computer science, or you come out, engineering. A lot of these, some of these guys might be, literally rocket scientists. You come out thinking a certain way, and I think you're very technical and you're very analytical. But I think an excellent illustration of where that model kind of falls apart was with long-term capital management, which I reference in the book. And one of the things is in the book, When Genius Failed, the author, I forget his name, it's an excellent
Lowenstein. Yep.
Yeah. he basically said that they cared, that they were removed from the floor, these guys at LTCM, and they only cared about what their models told them. He said they'd forgotten the human factor. Yep. And the human factor is very key. And you see that even in the movie Trading Places, when I think for traders, one of the most, it's a great movie, and it really does. And a lot of art did imitate life. I mean, it really was that crazy down there. That wasn't an exaggeration for the camera. But to me, one of the most interesting scenes that really demonstrates the concepts that you and I were just discussing is when Dan Aykroyd tries to hawk his $6,500 watch, right? Yeah. And he goes to a pawn shop, right? And it's a famous blues guy. I forget who it was who played the pawn guy, but and Aykroyd basically explains to him why this watch is worth $6,500. It's got all, you can tell time and all these different the whole spiel that he gives him, right? And the guy says in Philadelphia it's worth $50, and right. So Dan Aykroyd's model, like LTCM, told him it was worth $6,500. So as long as they buy it at $6,000, they're making in theory $500, right? Yes. But in reality, when everybody knows you're the only guy who owns the watch and you have to sell it, all of and in this case, the guy thought that the watch was stolen, which is why he wasn't going to pay a good price for it, right? Remember he said it's burning my fingers. All of a sudden, and that's where the human element of trading comes in, because really, when you think about it, the access to markets, the conduits through which we do our business has changed, right? It went from, maybe meeting on a street corner to more organized exchanges like the futures exchanges that you and I were a part of, that were around for 150 years, the open outcry system, to electronic trading now. Everything I do is point and click. But the people making these trading decisions, whether they're screaming sold or whether they're hitting a button, are human beings. And markets are basically a collective expression of human sentiment. And sometimes, as you know, and as we've seen many times in history, that sentiment can be dead wrong. And that's where the opportunities come in, But I think if you come out of the school where everybody sees the same thing in their model, therefore everybody believes it's the same thing, and they've never seen any outside scenario, that could change it, that could turn a $6,500 watch into $50. Well, I think you set yourself up for potential, certainly some potential financial hurt. And again, long-term was a perfect illustration of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, long-term capital management was the perfect example of an organization with impeccable modeled mathematics. They just forgot that the world was fractionally flawed around the edges, and that was enough to take them out of business. And yeah, it's a good point you make, because the floors were a great equalizer and a great way of actually showing financial markets in action, and also being incredibly transparent, because you could see, you may not have known who the ultimate counterparty was on the far end, but you could tell who the intermediaries are and what was going on. And I mean, another example I think is quite fun about that was that when markets went electronic, I spent a lot of time with exchanges trying to explain to them they needed to rewrite their rule books. And the reason they needed to rewrite the rule books was because when it came to errors, it was very easy, because if I made a mistake, I went, oh my God, I've made a mistake. And then I would go and negotiate with the pit to see if I could get any degree of leniency or penance from them, whatever it was. But when you do that on a screen, everybody goes, well, it's a conspiracy theory. Whereas when you're on the floor, all those pit clerks and all the guys who are on the telephones can go, oh, well, yeah, there's just been some sort of a misunderstanding. Patrick's got it wrong, blah, 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 blah. They're sorting it out. And nobody cared. And that was a very, very different environment, which people didn't really appreciate. And I mean, I was very impressed, actually. There was a great bit. I'm going to read you part of your book, but it's actually for our audience today. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, send us a little love if you get a chance, please, because AI likes love on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, where we're broadcasting today. So, to quote Brad's excellent book, I cut my teeth where a seething mass of gyrating, sweaty type A personalities through whom the nation's commerce coursed as if part of its economic bloodstream. Compared to the hyper-fast speed of computers today, open outcry, as it was called, may seem now like an inefficient way to conduct business, screaming at each other while wildly gesturing in a sign language as unique as this mode of transacting itself. But there was a brutal honesty in how matters were conducted in the trading pits that cut through any pretense. There was also a sense of pride in being one of the working parts of the machine of capitalism itself. We were the ones who made the prices and took the risk of dealing either as a buyer or seller. I think it's a great surmise of the floors, actually. I really, really love it. And
Thank you.
the book is fantastic. So tell me, you went from one movie set to another because you were talking about Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You then went to the floor that was used in trading places, NYMEX. How did that move come about?
Well, in 1990, my boss had got an inclination that crude oil was going to be a big product. And so he sent me out there. There was one guy who was a trader for us, and I was a senior clerk, and he wanted someone to go out there to help us, set that up and basically, serve as the clerk, as basically the go-to guy for the trader there. And I was looking for a reason to get out into Chicago for a while, so I went to New York, and it just so happened that he started this thing. The guy my boss he was very good with spotting opportunity, and he went there just before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and created some of the greatest oil trading environment that we've ever seen from a pure volatility trading standpoint. Because for those who may have been too young, Saddam Hussein in 1990 sent his troops across the border into Kuwait, and there were a lot of reasons why he did it, which I explained in the book a little bit. But bottom line is, he effectively took a good percentage of crude oil off the market, and so that sent the market going crazy. So I learned a lot there, and then I got rewarded by going back to Chicago to get my seat. My boss said, if you do this for me, when you come back, I'll sponsor you on a trading seat. So I ended up trading in the Eurodollars with my brother and his partner for a while, and then I got it. And then I got a chance to go back to New York, and I had met my future wife at that point, and I had some family now in Maryland, which I hadn't had before, including my mother and all that. So moving to New York, made sense for me, and that's where I traded, and that's where I worked, and ended up working in Jersey City, and now I'm here in a commuter suburb of New Jersey in my little office / man cave, talking to you fine people.
Talking to us through the world, and talking to us today, we have a LinkedIn user, which is none other than Beata Young. Catch her live stream midday tomorrow. Woman on it, the PhD positivity hack delivered. So Beata says, great to see another IPO vid. Hello, Patrick and Brad. And she's got a very interesting question. As would befit a woman in technology, how will advancements in artificial intelligence and automation further influence electronic trading? And will humans still be needed on the trading floor?
That is actually a very interesting question, and one we ponder all the time, because as you know, right now electronic trading is still just doing our bidding, right?
Yep.
I've got the Intercontinental Exchange screen in front of me, and if I want to buy something, I make the decision, right? Now the next step above that is what we call black box trading, which is you give the computers a bunch of parameters, if a bunch of if-then statements. If this happens, do this, and buy this much and put in this order and blah, 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 right? In theory, you can put these programs on and go out and play a game of golf and come back and find out what you did, right? As long as you have certain rules. That's but the interesting thing about AI, those are still algorithms that we program, and they're not going to change unless we go in there and change them, right? The thing that's so interesting and intriguing to me about AI, and which makes it a huge question mark, is, for example, like when I do a trade, right, there will be parameters that I will look at, and I will say, okay, all the stars are lined up. I should do this trade. In theory, I should do this trade. However, I know this particular pipeline's characteristics. I've seen this before. This is telling me, there's something going on here that I'm not seeing. So I'm actually going to pass on this trade. Right. For reasons, that my years of experience have told me, even if everything looks like it should be a good trade, there's something wrong here. There's something off. So I'm going to stay away from it, right? That's that almost what the Germans call Fingerspitzengefühl. It means intuition at the fingertips, right? They said like Rommel had that and a couple other generals. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I have it like that, but the interesting thing is, can AI program and learn and that thought process? So let's say if 3 times in a row I take a signal that turns out to be a false one. Now, what I would do personally is I would say, I would look at that signal and go, you know what? I don't think that's a robust signal. I'm going to no longer do that, right? But I have to literally go into my algorithm and erase that command, right? Whereas AI would learn. Now, would AI learn the way I just learned and say, okay, like I don't have a hard and fast rule that says after 3 I'm out, but
Right.
I'm just, but after 3, my gut tells me there's something. Now, can AI start to, it is gut feeling really just a sort of just a prompting from within that is the voices of all your experiences kind of coming and giving you a verdict? If so, AI can capture that,
Yep.
I think. And
Yep.
AI can create AI can almost like watch the way I trade and start to learn that I have certain characteristics, certain idiosyncrasies, certain style that I use,
Mhm.
and it might almost create an artificial Brad. So to answer your question, electronic trading has already made trading floors per se that we're talking about, open outcry, obsolete. Over the counter trading floors, like the big floors you see like at Goldman Sachs and stuff. In other words, what she's really asking is, will traders be needed in the future? It depends on how powerful AI gets. It's the one thing that Elon Musk says keeps him up at night. So I have a feeling that AI is much more powerful than even I realize. So I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and say it's extremely powerful. It will just, Moore's law, it will just continue to grow, frighteningly so, almost to the point of 2001 situation.
Yep.
And I think at some point down the road, a lot of traders will be using AI in replacement of actual traders themselves, and that would be interesting. I don't have a time frame on that, but it's funny. I went to University of Illinois, and according to the book 2001: Space Odyssey, the HAL 9000 computer was built at the University of Illinois. So I've always been kind of afraid of robots going crazy on me, But
Open the pod bay door, Hal. Yeah.
right, I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave.
Precisely. Well, actually, I mean, on the we've a flurry of technology questions today. Really, really good. Thank you so much, Beata, for your question.
Well, I hope that answered it. I mean, that's sort of a long way of saying I'm not sure, but I would not be surprised if AI became so powerful that it made traders obsolete. If that's the short cliff note answer.
No, I think that's a really, really great answer. And actually, it's an interesting follow-on question here, but this is coming from Woman on It. How will blockchain technology impact the security and transparency of commodity trading, do you think, Brad?
I'm not qualified enough on blockchain to make a comment on that. The only experience I've ever had with it is being, part of a little bit of it on Bitcoin. Really, just to kind of get my feet wet. But I really honestly can't comment on that. I just don't know enough about the technology to give you a qualified answer.
I appreciate your honesty, Brad.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Rather than trying to mansplain your way out of a situation, it's really cool. We got several questions. Actually, here's a great.
I have the feeling that your people would see right through it if I tried to BS. So.
Well, I think you're paying a great compliment to my viewership, and I definitely believe that they are incredibly technologically savvy. So probably a sound move there to hedge yourself. We got a question then coming up, and we'll get back to the general narrative in a moment. But these are great questions. Thank you very much, Woman on It, Beata Young. And now we've got Rumbeat. Hello from Poland. I wonder what, in your opinion, are the potential economic and social consequences of the decline of physical trading floors in terms of job losses and community impact?
Well, that's actually a question that is one of the questions that prompted me to write the book. First of all, by the way, I just thought I'd say for an aside, you're from Poland. My favorite composer, I used to play piano I wanted to be a concert pianist when I was a kid, and Chopin was my favorite composer, and Paderewski was my favorite player there. So that's my little shout out to Poland. Also, my godmother's Polish too. So anyway, the question about impact on jobs. Well, it already wiped out the floor and any jobs that went with it. It's like, I mean, anytime you have technological innovation, you're going to have creative destruction, right? And so in terms of the floor, the open outcry floor, those are gone. So we already know how technology impacted that. It made a 150-year-old business obsolete in about 2 decades. Over the counter, I can tell you how it's affected me. It's taken my job from being on the floor to being over the counter, and I've adjusted pretty well. So, as you can see where I am now, I'm in a trading office. And I think a lot of guys from the floor were able to do that. But the question is, what happens again, this kind of ties into the previous question. I think a lot of what will happen with trading jobs on trading floors in the future vis-a-vis technology will be a direct offshoot of what happens in the AI space. I think there's nothing to say that if AI cannot develop into thinking like humans and learning like humans, that instead of having 5 Brad Schaeffers sitting at a desk on the phone, you'll have just 5 little kiosks, little HAL 9000s just running, just trading and learning and learning and trading and trading and learning. I mean, it's pretty interesting. I don't think I'll be alive to see it, but it presents a pretty interesting question. And like I said, I think AI will determine a lot of the direction of job growth or job loss in the future in my business.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point altogether. Now, we've got another question that's just come in from, in many ways, the financial technological messiah himself, JC, Jonathan Cowan, out of London. I'm not sure you're going to necessarily jump in with a great answer here. This has come through on a separate stream. I'm afraid for some reason it hasn't printed on my main screen, so I can't pull it up on the screen in front of you. Brad, what are your thoughts on GPT-4 model fine-tuned using a proprietary database of up-to-date macroeconomic intelligence? The answer he's suggesting is harnessing the power of cutting-edge AI technology. You would be able to analyze and interpret complex financial trends and live dynamics like never before.
Well, the question is, okay, I'm not going to even pretend that I understand a lot of the technical aspects of that question in terms of, but when it comes to AI, an interesting thought that you might have is, okay, when I look at AI, it still has to think, if I understand it right, it still has to think and learn like a human being. And if the idea is that AI will allow us to make more accurate macroeconomic prognostications in the future, then obviously it would have a major impact on it. But the question is it just being taught to think the way a current economic analyst thinks? An analyst has this, if an analyst and a computer are given the same information, which one of them is going to make the better call about what it implies for the future? I don't know. My guess, though, is that if the computer is taking an AI profile, is it going to just try to be learning to think like that analyst? And analysts often get things wrong. Like, I don't know if AI is the magic bullet or to get rid of risk, and so I don't know if that answer made sense or not, but I view AI as something that will replace humans, but I don't know if it will necessarily improve upon them. So certainly, when it comes to your macro question, I would say I don't know who will win out in terms of being a better predictor of macro trends, which can change in a dime anyway.
And in fact, actually, Jonathan's adding a comment here to it. He said he's working on this now, but he agrees with you that it needs to have the knowledge fed to it and have the correct choice of data, which I think is also a big issue. I mean, garbage in, garbage out. And also, I think the other thing, you make a comment there, and I don't know why this just sprang to mind, but a lot of people keep talking about taking the humans out of things. And I remember very, very well, I mean, after the Second World War, they came to the conclusion that the game changer of going from propeller technology to jet technology changed the rules of dogfighting, and therefore fighter planes would fly in a different way until essentially the American Air Force got to Vietnam, and they had essentially their posteriors kicked for quite some time by a bunch of Vietnamese pilots who on paper had nowhere near the same bona fides, which obviously led to, well, amongst other great things, Tom Cruise's movie career going through the roof. Top Gun Academy. But it is, I mean, it's really, really interesting. And actually, we've a lovely perspective here from someone in India, from Charanjit Singh Saini. Hello, great to know the journey from floor to electronic commodity trading. I have experience of 20 years in electronic trading in India. It's an interesting topic. Add more in future, Brad and Patrick. So there you go. There's a call from the slightly younger generation asking the grey heads to keep talking about what it was like in the old days. We thoroughly approve of that. We're glad that we've still got a position in your life. understand you.
Well, the thing is, I think you and I had spoken about this before. One of my favorite books on trading, and in fact, if you read the book Market Wizards, Schwager's book, one of the things that stuck out at me in that book was that they all kind of mentioned the same book as the best book on trading they'd ever read, and it was Reminiscences of a Stock Operator, which was from 1923. So it's 100 years old. But what's the primary theme of the book? It's nothing is new on Wall Street.
Yeah,
right? And that's kind of what we've been talking about. So for younger people to come and listen to us talk, it's time well spent, because we may remember a world of different technology than you have right now, but but we've also learned a lot about human nature and how it imprints itself on markets. And so listening to us talk and talk about the mistakes that we've made and stuff like that, you're not going to be ever screaming on a trading floor. You'll be pointing and clicking, but you will still be faced with the same humans on the other side of the screen. They'll be panicky, they'll be greedy, they will misinterpret things, they will go outside and they will say, wow, it's cold out, I'm going to buy natural gas, not looking at a national weather report that shows the whole country is actually warmer than usual, things like that. And so it's definitely worthwhile to listen to the gray hairs.
And in fact, that Lefebvre book, I mean, some of it's packed full of great anecdotes. I love one of the ones I always refer to is, and this may be difficult for AI to pick up on, was the instance where he and like a junior went to see some CEO of some great burgeoning industrial stock, and the CEO is running around the office collecting bits of paper and stapling them together so that they recycle the paper. I suppose he was an early advocate for ESG, but he was 70, 80 or 100 years ahead of his time. And they go outside and the junior sort of says, wow, that's the most incredible company I've ever seen. Like the CEO's so in charge. And Lefebvre stops him and sort of goes, no, we're selling that stock right now, because if the CEO is running around collecting bits of paper, clearly they've completely lost the plot in terms of what they're doing. And sure enough, the company falls out of bed. And I don't know, does artificial intelligence pick that up? It's an interesting question. And if I may say so, I'm sorry, our LinkedIn Inward Bound feed is not coming to me directly on screen. Patrick, what a cool interview with Brad, says Robert Brown. Thank you very, very much, Robert. Great to hear from you once again. That's absolutely super. I'm going to come to another comment in a moment, but actually, I'm aware while we're in the midst of talking about all these books, I should talk about our book of the week so as not to squeeze that out. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, we had several of the books that we've been talking about today. I mean, the Lefebvre book, I do believe, came up about a month ago. And also, actually, we were talking about the Lowenstein book just last week, indeed, if I remember correctly. But today, we're on crashes, bangs, panics, and booms again. This time it's different. Carmen Reinhardt and Kenneth Rogoff's book, relatively recent book in the crash disaster compendium, but a really, really fine example of academic work that is approachable for all parties and is a super discussion of how, and if I may term it thus, the class of people who I would refer to as the educated stupid, i.e. they've ended up with so much education they all think exactly the same way, can get themselves into glorious pickles in financial markets and economic booms over time, which can be a really, really huge problem. That's our book of the week. Don't forget to check out the weekend edition of Exchange Invest. That's free for all. You can sign up at exchangeinvest.com, which has more macro topics like articles by Brad Schaeffer, for example, when he's talking about his many political and other economic related articles in the likes of all sorts of publications, all the way to the Wall Street Journal, The Hill, etc. And of course, if you really want the hardcore financial insights of the exchange of information, do think about signing up to exchangeinvest.com for the daily newsletter, which pays our salaries and ultimately allows us to do live streams and thrilling discussions such as this. And indeed, I think we've had some feedback while I'm here from our good friend, I do believe it was Rombeat, left us a message just a couple of seconds ago saying, thank you very much for the very insightful answer. It is a joy to listen to two great speakers in the exchange parish. Oh, thank you very much. We're flattered. I have to say, I think it's fabulous having Brad on the show. Now, Brad, I'm gonna posit two books at you. The second one's yours, so that will give you a good chance to talk. But actually, the earlier one, I mean, you talked about Lefebvre, Educated. That's a great book. I mean, it's a really, really great book. Another book which I think is marvelous was Jose de la Vega's. That's a much older book from the 18th century. Confusion to Confusiones, set on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange trading floor 300 years ago. But nonetheless, one thing that I think it has in common with your book is fabulous caricature portraits of the people who are actually on the floor. And I got to really applaud you. I know you've anonymized a lot of these people and so on, but it doesn't matter whether we know who those people are. You do a fantastic job of giving us a little caricature so we can understand those types of character who were in the business of floor trading.
Oh, yeah.
So how did you come about writing the book? What was the inspiration to do this?
Well, I had, when I'd read, I thought when I'd read that the floor of the New York Mercantile Exchange had closed, it was 2017, I believe, 2016, I think, 2016, or they'd announced that they were closing or whatever. And I was surprised by how little fanfare or even commentary that received, even in like the financial pages, you know. Yeah. And so I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal called, I'll Miss the Trading Floor, because I'd written a couple of things for them before. And I basically described, what it was about the floor that I liked and why I think it's kind of a shame that those floors are going to be gone. As some of those are the reasons we discussed before, access to the regular guy, for the regular guy, stuff like that. And so I decided to take that and turn it into a book afterwards. And so it started off just kind of being a memoir. And then I was like, I should probably just actually write the whole story of how I got to the floor, and not because to be a book about me, but to kind of use my experience as one of the many, many avenues that people use, and unconventional avenues to get into finance and get into high finance. Like if you had told me in 1985 that I'd end up, being trading energy derivatives out of an office in New Jersey and at age 56, I'd be like, what, So it's just kind of weird how I don't know if it was John Lennon who said it or whatever. That's probably an old phrase, but life is what happens when you're making plans. And life and all of us kind of got down onto that floor because of usually some extraordinary circumstance or some unconventional approach, some or unconventional path. So, and I think what it did was, like you said, it created a group of kind of iconoclastic, I don't want to say misfits because that's a pejorative, and these guys were definitely not misfits. They were some of the sharpest people I've ever met. Yep. But you have, I can just do a mental exercise and close my eyes, and I can kind of look around the trading floor, and I can see a former Chicago Cubs pitcher. I can see a guy whose family started off as a haberdasher. I can see a guy who survived the Holocaust, remember this is the 80s, not 90s. Yep. So I can see like I said, high school dropout tennis pro. I could see, black guy to my right, a Jewish guy in front of me, born again Christian to my left. Just all, whatever, a woman art teacher was one of the best traders we ever had in my company. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very interesting, eclectic group of guys. And I think for people like me, who I've always kind of done my own thing, and you're kind of doing the same, right, with your podcast. So you're trying to do it your own way, right? I think that was very appealing of it, and there was a great atmosphere down there where such behavior, being raucous, being loud, being almost impulsive or whatever, was actually rewarded in a way it wouldn't be in the in the C-suite or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. And it led to such a direct culture. It was also funny how some of these guys had concealed themselves. When you mentioned earlier on the Ivy League grad who looked incredibly not a hair out of place and so on, mm-hmm. I can remember one of the loudest and most obnoxious, when he was in trading mode, persona on the trading floor in life in London was actually a guy who'd done a PhD at the University of Liverpool. And when they were giving him his PhD, they said to him, okay, great news. You're going to be on a fast track to tenure. We want you as a lecturer. You're marvelous. And he said, oh, no, stuff that. I learned so much about floor trading writing my dissertation that I'm off to London to be a floor trader. And when you put this guy out in front of people and people would go, I used to get visitors to the floor and I put them beside the footsie pit and I go, okay, one of these people has a PhD and is effectively more educated on paper and economics than everybody else in the pit. Can you guess who it is? No one ever could guess. It was the loudmouth guy who masticated his gum with such gusto, Brad, that you thought his knuckles were going to burst. And we've all seen those guys. We've got a load of comments today. It's a really fantastic show. Thank you so much for all of your interventions. First of all, Messy Times We got Chris Messina there out in Florida. When the floors closed, I had to find a new way to steal or earn a living. Well, all I can say, that's very amusing, Chris. I imagine it must be still raining in Florida today. Let's say the grumpy mood there. No, great to hear from you, Chris. Always good. Hope Messy Times is doing really, really well. We also have, Jonathan Collins working on his large language model, and he's quite intrigued. He's been teaching model option strategies to get a view on the fly of what's going on in the brain of the artificial intelligence. Quite interesting, because obviously we were all taught options in a very two-dimensional world. I guess the AI is learning it in a totally 3D world as it goes on. And that brings us beautifully, thank you to Anne Berg, guest of ours just a few months ago, a great commodities expert, very thought-provoking discussion before the subject fades into irrelevance. Did you find a cultural difference between the NYMEX and CME CBOT pits? And she outs herself here because she's a former CBOT pit trader. Brad.
Yeah, no, absolutely there was. That was one of the things that I found interesting. I even said, the guys in New York, they talk like this, and they were a little bit more, streetwise sounding, than the guys in Chicago were a little bit more, they reminded me more of a bunch of Midwestern guys. But I will say, above, beyond the superficial accents, maybe change, clothing styles or whatever, the biggest cultural difference to me when I went there wasn't the traders so much as the venues themselves.
Okay.
And I mentioned the Chicago Merc, and the Board of Trade, where this person went, where Ann went, is they were very high tech, high flying. They were the pinnacles. Them and the Life would be, I considered to be, at the time, the most important exchanges, and they were very technologically advanced. When I went to the floor of the NYMEX, which was really, first of all, one thing I noticed is that it was 4 exchanges under one building, in one roof, and you just kind of walked from one to the other. There was no real dividing line, so there would be guys with different colored badges, and you're like, oh, that. So you had like the Coffee, Sugar, Cocoa Exchange, the New York Mercantile Exchange. You had the commodities, the COMEX, the Commodities Exchange. And I even think you had like the New York Financial Exchange or something like that. You had 4 exchanges on this little building. And the phones were very old. They reminded me, they were like one step above a rotary phone. And it was dark and dim. And I just felt it was very dingy and run down. I mean, I kind of describe it literally as a dump when in the book. But then after 9/11, they got a brand new trading floor, which was every way, shape, and form as good as the Chicago ones. But the thing that actually I find the most interesting culturally is the similarity between the traders. There's a lot of there's a lot of that iconoclast in a New York, cocoa trader or in a Chicago wheat trader. So again, beyond the superficial regional differences, to me, the most interesting contrast was the lack of contrast in terms of how people viewed things and how they viewed money and how they viewed trading.
One of the things I'll never forget about going to the NYMEX floor was you're in the middle of Manhattan, this great bastion of democratic liberalism, where they've always voted for the Democratic Party since time immemorial, I think since before there was a New York and before there was a Democratic Party. And you'd go on the floor and you'd meet like 40, 50 guys, and they'd all have badges for the NRA, the National Rifle Association. And I mean,
yeah, it was very conservative.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. The entire membership in terms of Manhattan proxy branch, because a lot of these guys were coming in from Jersey or wherever, but the Manhattan proxy branch of the NRA obviously had about 25 times the membership when there was a trading day. It was yeah.
Well, because a lot of these guys, down on the floor, they weren't from the Upper West Side. A lot of these guys came from Staten Island, came from the Jersey Shore. I lived in Hoboken. I actually never even lived. Well, I lived in New York City in the Milford Plaza for a while. But I never lived in New York City promptly. Directly. I lived once I moved out of the hotel. I lived in Hoboken, and so yeah, you do see. I think also it's because it's a place that attracts. I think finance attracts more conservative people for the most part. I think the more left-leaning people in college, if they're picking a major, will go into journalism or go into sociology or psychology, something like that. Whereas people on the right, I think, tend to be a little bit more STEM oriented, especially finance oriented. I mean, that's just a theory. I don't have any data to back that up, but certainly anecdotally, I have found the more capitalist people tend to be, for the most part, the more conservative they tend to be. Unless
Well,
you're
also,
talking about like a Zuckerberg or a Diamond or somebody like that. But that's
yeah, but
uber well.
you also get that fabulous series of contrasts. I can think of a couple of people. I mean, Anberg will know who I'm talking about here, which is a well-known senior figure in the Dutch trade union movement who ended up going into a multinational organization and coming out the far side, a fully fledged member of the exchanges are great and let's have more raw capitalism to grow the world plan. And in fact, Ira Harris, who was our guest a few months ago, who's a great trader on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, who arrived as a raw left-wing student to show up these markets. And after a couple of years, he was actually like, kind of, this thing actually works. I can see, I mean, everything has its flaws, but I can see it works. And Johan Norberg said the same thing when he was in the show a few weeks ago. So messy times. Chris Messina comes back and makes a very opposite point. Awesome cultural observations, Brad. If I may say so, I think that's possibly the best takeaway from your book. And I don't mean in any way disrespect. There's some great trading insights and great insights into the minds of how these guys went about their daily business. But it is the cultural observations about how it worked. And also, I must admit, some of your chapter headlines are absolutely hilarious. Just get in there and trade and take your charts and shove them, being a particular one, which I think
days.
All had those sorts of days, haven't we? Let me just jump to a question, actually, because Charanjit's back, and he says, what's your view on options trading and how it's picked up in CME? Do you think it's good for commodities traders?
Oh yeah, I love options trading. I mean, I even taught options class at Prebon when I was a broker, and I've always been an options trader for the most part. And one of the reasons why I chose that, and I also brokered options, over the counter. So I've always been in the options world more than the futures world. And one of the reasons is because I think it's less vulnerable to electronic trading than straight futures, right? It's one thing to create code that will basically say, okay, here's a whatever. Let's just use crude oil for an example. Here's a crude oil is trading at $70 a barrel, wherever it is. I don't have it up, but wherever it is. And so it's easy to create something that says, if I point and I click on that, I will buy $70, right? You don't need a broker to do that. But you do, but it's a lot different if you say, okay, I like crude oil at $70. I want to do a January of 2025, 75, 90, 1x2 call spread with a 32 delta. All of a sudden you do something like that. And now you need, humans start to come back into it a little bit. So also, options to me are, I describe in the book, I say futures is checkers, options is chess. Yes. And so I've always loved options. I love options for the variety of opportunities. I like that you can put on a position, especially if you're long options. I always try to be on the long side. The reason being, I don't want to wake up in the morning with and look out the window and see a mushroom cloud and realize that I was short a bunch of futures and now I'm done. So
yeah, we all feel that way.
I don't believe in selling options though. What's that whole if that company optionsellers.com, learn that lesson, right?
Yep.
What do we say about selling options, right? It's like picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. So if you're going to trade, do it from the long side. 9 times out of 10, you'll be wrong, but the one time will pay for the other 9 times, and you will not lose sleep waking up, and you'll know ahead of time how much you have at risk. So it helps you with risk management as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, on the risk management, it reminds me, we're just 2 months away from the 10-year anniversary of HANMAG, a great moment in the early career of machine learning computers, where I think they managed to lose. They started the day as a prop trading firm with 20 million plus in capital, and they ended the day at minus 25 million. In fact, it was only 143 seconds it took their computers to manage to fritter away their entire life savings and then some. So there's lots of references in there that are quite key. And we got Chris Messina back again. Just make a comment that as a self-Republican Manhattanite, when I left, that took 25% of the GOP away. I actually think you're possibly over-egging it. I thought the whole Manhattan GOP was Flip Piddo, the prediction markets expert, and nobody else these days. But maybe it's diminished since you left, actually, Chris. So, I mean, looking at this wonderful world, you have this book. I think it's really, really fabulous. I mean, altogether, Life of the Pits. It's a brief, easy read, but there's a lot of insight. There's a lot of character to it and so on. What do you think is the sort of core message that anybody should take away from the book?
Number one is that the world doesn't owe you a living. So if if I learned that, the one thing I loved about the floor was it atomized my ego the moment I got down there. So I think number one is that. Number two is listen to your bosses, unless you want to get fired a lot. I'm just kidding. I did lose my job once in the book, but I deserved it, as I say. But really, and also from a trading standpoint, if the one thing that I have tried to impart is discipline and cutting your, it's cliche, but you cut your losses early and you let your winners ride. The overall, so that's my trading advice. I know that sounds cliche, but trust me, a lot of guys have a hard time doing it. So I kind of describe in the book, how you have to reverse certain emotions to allow you to trade. I don't think human beings are hardwired to make money trading. I think they're hardwired to lose money trading. And I think that's why this is such a difficult profession. And I think that's why it takes years sometimes to kind of eventually figure it out, because you're really fighting against yourself and your own emotions. The overall theme of the book is that it was a great run in trading on the floor. Open Outcry was a great, interesting way to do business. I met a lot of really cool characters. I learned a lot of things about life, about myself, and that I do believe that something was taken away from Wall Street when the floors went away. And I think it is what we've alluded to before, that human element that is so important, right? Yep. And I do believe, the Israelis, Mossad has something, I hope I get the number right, I forget, I wrote about it in the book, but it's called, I think, the 10th Man. And the mentality is that if 9 guys all think the same thing is going to happen, right? They know for sure that the Allies are going to invade at Calais, right? They're not going to, right? Well, the 10th guy goes, I don't know, Normandy looks like a good place too. We should consider that as well, right? And so it's sort of the same thing with trading. If you say to yourself, oh, you know what, this thing looks like it's worth 9 cents. So it's offered at 7, why don't we just buy all we can? And maybe there might be one guy go, well, I remember when this happened back in 98. And, and the reason was, have you checked the weather? Have you looked at anything? Are you seeing anything? And all of a sudden be like, wow, that's interesting, and this guy basically prevents them from making a mistake that their machines would have just jumped in and made, right?
Yep.
So I think that gets lost. So I think Wall Street lost something by cutting off the access to it, access to it by people like us who are a little bit more think out of the box, a little bit more iconoclastic, and obviously the people who would like to get into Wall Street but don't have the wherewithal to get into a MIT business school or something like that, or UPenn. I think they lost something by having that door closed as well. So, I don't see a lot of good coming out of it. I just see a transfer of way people do business. Yep. I don't think it's a net good or a net bad that they're gone. If you read the book, what was it? Flash Boys by Michael Lewis. Yes. All that happened was when the guys on the floor, like Messi made actually something funny. He said, I had to look for a different way to rip people off. Well, if you want to, use that way of thinking, what happened was these flash traders did find a way to rip people off, right? Yep. They found a way to get in front of the orders by a millisecond, and so what happens is human beings are always going to find a way to game a system, whether it's a trading floor, whether it's using fiber optic cable, whether it's using AI, whether it's just, and so I just see the floor. I forget where I was going with this. I just see what I learned from the floor was that there's many different ways to do business, and there isn't one better way over the other. And I wish they were still here, just because I think it would be a good thing for capitalism and a good thing for a lot of hungry guys looking for an opportunity.
Well, I think we've got 3 comments here, which actually probably tell a little story themselves. They're slightly longer than a haiku, but let's have a go at it. First of all, Messi Time says, you're welcome in response to your kind compliments. Then he says, we made money the old-fashioned way, front-running our customers.
Right, hang on. Just with that, that's what I was talking about, right?
Yep.
Running customers. That's all the Flash Boys were doing too, right?
Yeah, that's all the Flash Boys were doing, exactly.
Right, and that's what AI is going to do. So don't worry, you're not the only person who's ever front run people.
No, exactly. I mean, that's always it's always been informational asymmetry, and that's where Richard Fullerton. Good afternoon, Richard. He's come in and says NYMEX was the victim of itself. The ownership model made it a rigged casino, which I think is a topic for a whole separate discussion. Brad, we'll probably come back at some stage to actually go through that, because look, Your book is fabulous. It's really, really interesting. I love the idea that you're talking about, whether or not it's a magic bullet for AI. I adore the comment that you make about the fact that walking through the door of the exchange floor, it atomized your ego. And I think that's a great thing, which actually probably maybe the atomizing your ego module is something they ought to consider for graduate training programs for this generation of snowflakes and so on. Let me ask you, we're at that time in the show again where I'm going to ask you our regular question. So, Brad Schaeffer, we've had a great comment, great discussion going from the floor to the future. Where do you think the capital market revolution goes next?
Well, it's what we've been talking about. It's going to be AI everywhere, I think. And I see, I think in terms of execution, AI is going to be taking over a lot of it, like as we've discussed. But I think also, I don't understand personally how countries like the U.S. can continue this debt load, without some sort of a day of reckoning. So I don't know when it's going to be, but there's no way that we can't have hyperinflation at some point. What was the name of the book that you held up before? This time it's different.
This time is different. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you can show me one time where printing money has printed our way into lower inflation, I'll happily take a look at it. And I'm really concerned about the debt to GDP ratio right now. And the biggest falsity that people use to try and justify it, and it's bipartisan, by the way. So this is not a slam on one party or the other. They're both to blame. What did Newt Gingrich say? He said Republicans like to spend money as much as Democrats. They just feel guilty about it afterwards. But if you can't keep printing this money nonstop and not eventually seeing a massive spike in inflation, which will then bring massive interest rates. So I think some sort of an economic reckoning is coming. I don't know when, I don't know where. It might be accelerated by AI. If AI becomes self-aware and pulls what was the thing on Terminator, right? Skynet.
Yes.
It becomes self-aware and says, this is unsustainable. I'm selling all my bonds, right? Or whatever, or I'm selling all my stocks. What if all of AI doesn't realize that the only reason why, $36 trillion, whatever it is, $34 trillion national debts don't come with a catastrophic end is because we've all kind of agreed, not to mess with it, right? Yep. Like we all, it's like we all know we got a tiger by the tail, but we can't let it go, right? And the Fed every now and then gets itself cornered into interest rate, it paints itself in these little interest rate corners, but now we're seeing interest rates higher than they were, I guess, and inflation higher than 40 years. But I mean, history, Weimar Republic, it can get a lot worse than this, inflation wise. And so that's what I'm really concerned about. And if anything, the advent of AI will probably accelerate that, because AI will just look at the numbers and go, this is wrong. This is unsustainable. Let's just sell it. If I wasn't a human being in on the game, I would just sell it. And you might see that.
Yeah, as Philander Chase Johnson memorably said in a Mad Magazine article, "Cheer up, the worst is yet to come," which I think surmises things quite beautifully. And actually, Chris Messina noting the fact that amen and ego is the biggest liability in financial markets. I think we might have had one other comment, but I haven't had it come on my screen from. I'm so sorry, Charanjit. I think you've said something, but I'm being told that you've said something, but I can't actually see it at the moment. So I do apologize for that if I'm not able to comment on it. Oh, here we go. Nope, we've already had that comment and question. So I think we're good. Hopefully we're caught up. If I've missed your comment, I really do apologize. This has been an epic discussion with Brad Schaeffer from the floor to the future. I think we covered the floor. I think we covered the future, but I think we still could have covered lots more in between if we wanted to. So maybe you can come back on the show some other time to have a further chat, Brad. It is really, really epic. Next week, we're going to be clearing Europe with Rafael Plata. He's the boss of each CCP. That's the European Association of Clearinghouses, a magnificent organization that removes risk without us even noticing every day of our single lives. Now, let me say finally, thank you very, very much to all our commenters today. Batty Young, Robert Brown, Jonathan Cowan, Charanjit, Rombeat, Woman in IT, Chris Messina, Richard Fullerton. My name is Patrick L. Young. We've barely got a few seconds left before we get to the hour. Brad Schaeffer, this has been a magnificent discussion. Thank you very, very much. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you for joining us on IPO-VID. Have a